So should you take an active approach to budgeting? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Let's get moving forward. Welcome to the Plan Ranger, where our goal is to provide you with informed insights and a reasonable approach for managing your personal finances. By far, one of the most frustrating things when it comes to managing your personal finances is the idea of budgeting, right? The idea of sitting there counting every single penny that you spend, every cup of coffee, this, that, and the other, and trying to mentally track it all in your head somehow or write it all down or something like that. Before we go any further though, there's something we should clarify. Everyone has a budget. You already have a budget, whether or not you're aware of it. You have some way that you allocate your spending. X goes to this, Y goes to that. No matter what, you have a budget. The question is it conscientious or not? Is it active or not? Is it something that you pay attention to or that you structure or that you regularly manage? The way to think of it's probably like dieting. Everyone has a diet, but people confuse the act of dieting. Hey, I want to lose weight or I want this, and so I'm going to start eating like this or do this for a little bit. They confuse the act of dieting with the fact that they have a diet. My diet consists of eating meat, salad, and copious amounts of whiskey, right? For budgeting, it's kind of the same thing. You have a budget no matter what. You have some way you spend money. The question is, do you take the time to actually think about budgeting and actively manage that process, right? Is it a cognizant, structured activity for you? And budgeting is one of those things that can become kind of a trendy thing every now and then. Different trends emerge in budgeting. So in the 80s, 90s, and even into the early 2000s, it was all about you have to budget and you have to become strict about your spending. And it became all about skipping the $5 cup of coffee, this legendary thing that was used as every example for everything was the $5 cup of coffee. I try and picture in the late 90s what a $5 cup of coffee was. The only thing I can think of is like the caramel macchiato, the things that are loaded with the vanilla and the sugar and things like that. And if you're drinking one of those every day, your biggest expense is probably like medications for diabetes, I would just assume. But that was always used as this proverbial thing that you should go without. And when it came to budgeting, you should skip this $5 cup of coffee. And now it's gone the other way. Now you're seeing all these institutions in place like that and people saying, no, keep your $5 cup of coffee. Common sense has to be somewhere in the middle, right? I think this is going to be kind of one of the styles of budgeting that we talk about, which is conscientious spending, right? Does what you're spending line up with your goals and your purpose in the sense of who you are? And does it actually really move the needle from you from a joy standpoint, from a happiness standpoint? That's really maybe where your focus should be. But just bear in mind that budgets tend to go through these things of being this trend and that trend and this, that, and the other, right? And that truthfully, you and who you are and how you manage yourself is going to be the larger issue here more than any particular trend at the moment. So just keep that in mind as we go forward here. And to kind of piggyback on that thought, it's your discipline that's going to drive whether or not any type of budgeting works for you, or active process of budgeting works for you. I mean, you can sit around and set up all the Excel spreadsheets that you want. You can, hatch your master plan for this is how I'm going to spend every single cent and nickel that comes into my into my bank account. If you don't execute it with discipline, it's all meaningless. You just wasted a bunch of time. So, ideally a good budgeting process is going to largely be built around you and who you are. And realistically speaking, one of the worst things you can probably do is lie to yourself. Know who you are, know what your flaws are. Every single person out there is a flawed human being just trying to do the best with what they can. No one's perfect, so don't feel like you have to be. Just try and find the model or the way of doing this that's going to work the best for you. It's also worth clarifying that some people never think about their budget at all. Or, they maybe periodically every now and then will go in and check, how things are going for them. Hey, here's my savings, or they'll do kind of a look back and see where their money went. But a lot of people don't ever think about it, right? And that can be okay if it is in your nature to spend less far less than what you bring in, and you know that you're hitting your savings target, you're hitting your savings goal, you're on track for retirement, emergency fund. If you're checking all of those boxes, then honest to God, budgeting might not be something you need to think about that much. And that's fine, good for you. But for some people who are trying to save more, if you find yourself struggling to save, if you find yourself struggling to not go deeper into debt or pull out the credit cards every now and then yeah, you might need to take a little bit more of an active approach to budgeting. Life isn't fair, that's for sure. Some people are naturally thin, naturally fit, and other people really have to focus on their diet, right? They really have to focus on what they eat and how they exercise and what they do. That's just the way it is, and budgeting might be like that. You might just really need to focus on it for a little bit, right? The good thing is that as you focus on it, as you work on it, and you become better at it, I think you'll see the result, if you really get disciplined with it, where you're going to have to look at it less and less. It'll just become kind of second nature to you, which is great. But just so you know, just kind of hop back here, you may be one of those people that doesn't really need to think about it. And if that's you, good for you. If you're saving enough, then this is not something you probably need to add to your list of stress. So let's look at some of the different budgeting methods though, just real briefly here, in kind of a top-down methodology. And I'll address that in just a second, what I mean by top-down. But let's say first we've got the save first methodology. The save first methodology would be kind of what I just referred to, the people who really never have to look at their budgets. They just save 15, 20, 30, 40% of their money and then spend everything else. They allocate the leftovers in their spending, right? That's probably the save first method. That's probably the easiest way to go, the least stressful way to go. After that, you have people that would be the more conscientious spending. Conscientious spending would deal with the idea that you just want to be aware of where your money's going. It's not really an active approach to, hey, I'm going to sit down and kind of table out X for this, X for, Y for that. It's okay, I'm going to save, but I'm also, when I'm spending, I do want to be aware of what I'm spending my money on. Am I spending my money on things that are just ridiculous, that aren't really bringing me any joy or happiness? Or am I just throwing my money away, or am I spending the things that actually really make me happy and deliver value to my life? And that's kind of where conscientious spending comes in, just being aware, thinking about as you're spending what you're spending on. Next up will be kind of like structured programs, and this is what most people probably think when they think of budgets. They think of this kind of middle category, I would say, like the 50-30-20 rule. 50% for your needs, 30% for your wants, and 20% savings, right? So those are kind of that's an example of kind of a structured program. And there are a few structured programs out there. It's not just 50-30-20. There's a variety of them that you can use and try to adhere to, but that type of intermediary level, let's just say, is going to try and put numbers and dial in your expenses into certain categories. 40% for contracted expenses, 30% savings, another 30% for, variable spending. There's all different types of models out there, but they all try and adhere to a structured rule where you kind of dial in, here's how much I should be spending on my house, my car, my subscriptions, all of these things, right? So that's kind of that intermediary system. After that, you'd have the envelope system. The envelope system is basically like a structured program. You could actually take all of these kind of intermediary things here, but then move it to the envelope system, which basically removes any type of plastic from the equation, any type of credit cards, things like that. The envelope system is about getting really cognizant about your spending by putting it into cash. So there are people that, if they use plastic, and maybe you're one of these people, but if they use plastic, they're just not aware of what they're spending. They don't see where the money goes. They don't think about it. They get that nice little hit of dopamine, those endorphins that kick in when they buy something, then buyer's remorse, and they're just not as aware about the pain on the front end when they purchase something. And the envelope system can work really well for that if you're one of those people, because it actually forces you to see the cash in your hand, right? And there are some people who believe that, you shouldn't use plastic at all because you never really recognize that you're handing something over. You're not making that mental connection that what I had in my wallet is now less because I gave it to somebody, right? Because I handed it away. And, and if you find yourself kind of struggling with budgeting, with spending, with debt, then maybe going to the envelope system is a decent idea, where basically you take all of the different bills that you're going to have for a month, and you put it all into cash, and you say, hey, X amount for rent, X amount for car payment, X amount for food and groceries, X amount for entertainment, and you have these various envelopes set up. After that, we're talking about getting professional help for things. And when I mean professional help, if you still find that none of these methods work for you, then you need to approach it more from a standpoint of, you might have a honest to God compulsion, a compulsive spending disorder, right? You might have a spending addiction, and that is a thing. I mean, there are people out there that really, in the same way that you have alcoholism and you've got, people who are addicted to smoking and things like that. Spending can be a compulsion for people. It can be a mechanism that they use to feel better about themselves or their position, in the world, things like that, and it just gets out of control. I've dealt with it professionally in my career with people who are compulsive spenders, and it's a tricky thing to get your arms around. It can be very challenging, and you might need to seek some psychological help for that. So hopefully what you're kind of seeing here, when I mentioned from top down, the order of these things from, the save first to the conscious spending to the structured program envelope to getting professional help, this is all about how cumbersome budgeting can be and how active it becomes. That top level is not very active. It's not, it's the least active. It's the easiest to do in theory. It requires the least amount of work on your behalf. As you go further down the ladder, you're building in more and more work for yourself, which might entail more stress, might be more cumbersome, but also deals with the problem with greater severity. So where some people say budgeting doesn't work, or everyone has to have a budget. Everyone has a budget. The active process of it works for some people and doesn't work for others. And depending on how severe your spending problems are, or the challenges you've had with saving or paying down debt, or just, getting your arms around your expenses, you might need to take a more serious approach to it. And really the function is just a question of kind of discipline here, right? Worst case scenario, if you want to try and just do look backs, become aware of where your money's going, right? Before you actually engage a structured model or go to the envelope system, at least try and move to that second level, that conscientious spending, where at the end of every month, take an afternoon, take an hour or two, and just look at your bills. Look at your credit card statements, your debit card statements, things like that. Or if you use an online system that allows you to put all of your cards in so that it shows you your spending in aggregate. Look at that once a month at least. Ideally, maybe more weekly, but at least on a monthly basis, take a look at it and see where your money's going. You will see things in there that you'll say, why did I spend money on that? Why did I do that? That was dumb. I would not have done that again, or I wouldn't do that again if I had that choice. And what that's going to do is it's going to cause you to at least be aware when you go forward, hey, I remember doing that last time and it didn't work for me. It didn't satisfy me and I shouldn't spend money on it. So now I'm not going to spend money on it in the future. You'll start to recognize those things. You'll become better at it. I also want to explore one other thing when it comes to budgeting that often goes unacknowledged. There's, in the financial world, especially among some professionals and especially among media personalities who sometimes don't deal with people on an individual level, you'll see them talk about these things like it's some distant foreign concept, like they read about it in a book type of thing. If you really are struggling with spending, if you're really, hey, I cannot save, I can't do this, it's just too tight. There are some realistic constraints in this world. And the idea that, that everyone can form a budget that allows them to do all these things like save, invest, all the things, it's probably not realistic. There are some people I know, but could be you, that are, scraping to get by. If you're making minimum wage and you live in or near a major city or something like that, and you just can't find a way to save, that could be your circumstances. It might not be a question of your volition or your discipline or something like that. Look, real world scenario here. Let's be honest. Unless you're some odd aberration that is okay living in a house with 9 people, in order to save, it just might not be possible for you. So then the secondary consideration comes up. You may need to make more money. When we're talking about budgeting, we're talking about how you allocate your expenses in order for you to be able to save and provide for your future somehow. That should be the end goal, theoretically. Make sure you don't go into debt and provide for your future. If you find that you can't save for your future, that you just can't get your arms around this, you may need to get a second job. I'm not, call it a side hustle, call it a side gig, whatever you want. You might need to earn more money. You might need to leave your current job. You might have taken that job because it was your passion. You love doing it. But if it only pays $30,000 a year and you need 40 or 50 in order to get by, you may need to move away from that passion project into a job that allows you to increase your earnings, get you up into 40, 50, 60, 70,000. You may need to get a second job, driving Uber, Lyft, or working at a restaurant, waiting tables, or whatever. You may need to just find second employment. The key thing here is that when you find that second job, when you increase your income, you don't then increase your expenses more. If you're struggling to keep up with your spending now, if you're struggling to save now, then you getting that second job isn't allowing you to really move forward per se, so much as it's allowing you to calibrate your income with where you're currently spending now. So you're kind of catching up. You're not moving ahead, which I know we all want to feel like we're moving ahead, but at least if you're catching up, you're not falling more behind. And that in and of itself is kind of moving ahead. The difference is you just can't increase your expenses when you do that. There's a saying, and I want to say it was Dr. Phil who said, more money doesn't solve money problems. I disagree with that. There are times that yes, more money can solve money problems. That's one of those things, one of those ideas that you see, on Instagram or Pinterest or something like that. Somebody just says something that doesn't make sense. More money can solve money problems, but it can also exacerbate them. If more money is just going to cause you to go deeper into debt, then of course it didn't do you any good. But there are times, and I've seen this in my career, where people took on extra work, they got a second job, or something like that, started doing, one-off projects, things like that, in order to supplement their income to get where they wanted to be, right? Kind of put one last thing out there. If you're dealing with a lot of debt, in particular credit card debt, let's say you've got 2, 3, 4, 5 credit cards out there that you're making payments on. If you're in the activity of budgeting and you're doing 50, 30, 20 or whatever it is, whatever your system is, I do want you to take a moment and I want you to pull out your credit card statements and I want you to look at what is the interest on there. And it'll disclose, hey, here's your minimum payment. Here's how much interest we added for this, for this time period. Let's say it was $100. Your minimum payment is $125. All right. I want you to create a separate line item for the interest that you're paying every single month. So I want you to take all the interest that you're getting from all these different credit cards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I want you to add all the interest, just the interest up every single month that's being added to your credit card bills. That's included in your payment, right? I want you to do that because I want you to see how much you're actually spending every single month on interest. I want you to see how much of your life and your cash flow you're going to be able to reclaim by making payments on your credit cards and paying off that debt. Because I think you'll be able to see that, wow, okay, if you've got 20% interest and you've got a $10,000 of total credit card bills out there, I mean, you're paying $2,000 a year more or less in interest, 180, 175, $200 a month, every single month in just interest payments. What are you really getting for it at this point? So that's kind of a last thing I just kind of throw out there just to poke some people that if you've got debt, to look at it this way, to kind of hold it in that light a little bit. And we're going to talk a little bit more about more budgeting methods. We're going to talk a little bit more about, dealing with it as far as debt goes and things like that. But for right now, we just kind of want to give a quick overview about budgeting, the process itself, the idea that you have a budget, whether it's active or not, whether it's structured or not. We're going to dig into some of the more structured methods later, including the 50-30-20 rule. There'll be a video, a segment coming out about that. But for the moment, that's all we have. So thank you very much for taking the time. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them down below in the comments. Click subscribe, like the video to join the Plan Ranger community. But more importantly, if you know anybody who's struggling financially, and especially if they're dealing with the topic of budgeting, please share this video with them and maybe you can help them out too and allow us to help them out. But anyways, thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Until next time, we hope this helped.